Okay, then after college is when things get a little bit crazy. Dan Audette was a good friend of mine, has been for a long time, and we met up at Orono and had a lot of crazy times. When we left, though, we wanted to form a band. But before that band started, I started jamming with Craig again, who was in 2 Miles Gone, and him and I formed a band called Akanababitsu. It was like an acid rock jam band, and bass and drums. And then I wrote One Day and Carey 10927 at the tail end of that. And then we split up, and then that's when Dan, on Halloween of '95, contacted me and asked me if we wanted to form a band similar to Sleeping with Fred and Candy Crank and all the bands that we'd listened to at the time. And so we formed the Happy Cannibals, which is one of the more important, larger bands of my career. And at the time, the band turned into Old Man Rails when Maddie and Chris joined. For a little while, we changed Old Man Rails and then back to Happy Cannibals. Over time, that band dissolved through many different lineups with Joel Kaplan and BJ and Tom Wilson and a bunch of other people. And it turned into Cake Factory, which is when Dan and I returned to our roots of chorus seeding and cake houses. Crazy time. I also play with Dan Audette on his one solo recording. At the very same time, though, I was doing a band with Dan Bourque, which was originally just Burke Wilson. It was us collaborating together, doing cover tunes of U2 and Radiohead and stuff like that. Then we got Jeff Adelberg, who was the original bass player of the Happy Cannibals, on board, and became Clockwork. And then we got Seth Levy, however he pronounces his name, to play drums with us and became Gromit. We actually played a show at Johnson Hall, one of the first times I ever played Johnson Hall. And as a side project to that, Jeff Adelberg and I formed a dual piano new age band called Eugene B. Emerson. So there's a chunk of that. Then, that's when I started getting into other bands, but I have to break them up into the towns they're from. I joined Moby Toad in early '96 to replace Aaron Carey. And during the early moments of Moby Toad, we backed up Jason Carey's dad, Jack Carey, at the Weather Vane a couple of times. But Moby Toad went on to do tons of shows, recorded an album called Night Music, which still goes down in my mind as one of the best things I've ever done. Great band. When that band dissolved, BJ and I formed Dr. Bluepen His Wandering What? Probably the most prolific band I've ever been in, 146 albums. Just crazy off the top, whatever happens, happens type of stuff. For a very short period of time, that turned into United Path of Fall. But then back into Dr. Bluepen His Wandering What? Some offshoots of that, the Acapella Guys, which is me, Dan, and BJ, doing a jam, kind of like a radio drama, during the great brownout that happened in '97 or '98 or '99. It Would Take a Lifetime to Film, which is a side band that BJ and I did where we tried to do my original tunes. Gigantha, which is another one where we tried to do BJ solo tunes. The Aardvark Dogs, which is when we started to try to write kind of like a radio-friendly piano pop. And then after BJ had passed away, his son Grant Brown and I formed Commissioner His Wandering What? Another part of Augusta Bands, a very important band I joined, was Drugaskan, which was like a death metal, black metal band with Dan and Chris Paulin. Andy Downs played in it, Joel Kaplan played in it, but BJ and I joined that. That then dissolved, and many years later I rejoined those people with Jim Ross to do Necropia. I had a side band with Chris Paulin and BJ called Loved What. I did side projects with Jim Ross, Ross Wilson. Did jams with Jim Ross and Jake Freeman, which is Ross Freeman Wilson. Then Jake and I joined forces and formed To Be Named Later by a Non-Human. BJ and I also took part in a very huge, important band in the area called Smoked Salmon, kind of like a Fish, Grateful Dead cover band. And then we did a side project band with Ben Baird and Chris Bridges called Big Bug, which played at Shelby's dad's party. I also took part in some Gardner bands, mostly famously Nipple Violator. I joined them right as they were stopping doing all the scummy crap eating and microphone fucking, and LeBlanc came on board and became Super Violator, and then he left and Shad Lewis came in on drums, and we continued to be Super Violator. I formed a couple of side projects with Josh Barnes, one called Flux Capacitor and one called Pooh Bear Secretions, which is mostly just our experimental 4-track recordings. I joined Jumpin' and the Moustaches for their cover of the White Album with Willie Berdan, Aaron Haynes, and Jeremy Skian, whatever you pronounce his name. And then as another side project of that, I was in the original bass player of Family Pet, which is in like a noise-free jazz band of Aaron Haynes and Willie Berdan. The other town that I was heavily associated with are Winthrop bands. One of my bass students, Matt Howe, was originally a bass player of a band called the Mendicants. I replaced him. That's with Ben Roy, Dan Rich, and Andy Bonsant. And then that eventually turned into ELKHORN this year with Dan Rich and Mark Zamaris, who was replaced by Sean Bonifant. So that spans a large part from '95 till the current date. There's still more to go.